Hello and welcome back to They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charlie Mann, and it's a real treat for me today to be talking with a good friend of mine who I got to know last year covering way too many miles out on a Colorado dirt road. He is someone who is a legal entrepreneur, a multifaceted entrepreneur and lawyer who has this really enjoyable philosophical, let's get into the esoteric side of everything, a bend that perhaps we'll dig into here. I don't know where this conversation is going to go, and I say that because, fair warning, it could go a lot of places, y'all. So let's sit back, let's have fun as we talk to the resident troublemaker in his legal operating agreement. I'm just giving his official title here, the resident troublemaker at McGrann Law, Owen McGrann. Owen, my friend, welcome to the show.
Charlie, it's so good to be here. You have made the mistake of inviting somebody who's listened to every episode, so prepare yourself.
There we go. I'm sure we'll somehow end up circling back on past episodes. You'll have a better memory of them than I will, and that'll be a treat as people get offended that I don't remember what they said. But first, my friend, you have to answer the question. What's the one thing they don't teach you in law school?
Yeah, so this is where the trouble of me having listened to all of the episodes before comes, because I came prepared for this question, and I'm not going to answer it. Because I think that behind the question is something that is interesting in and of itself, right? If you're asking the question, what don't they teach you in law school? It sort of begs the question, what is law school for? What is law school? Who is it for? And I think that there's a pretty fundamental disconnect between the schools and the students. I think it's four different things for each of those. In that, students think we are going to law school in order to become lawyers and learn what it takes, the information, the practice knowledge. We think that it's white collar trade school. Right?
Yes, I love that phrase. Oh, yes. I just want to chew on that phrase.
Law schools don't think that.
Right.
For these universities, law schools are moneymakers. And the only way that they can justify the tuition that we pay is by promising the salaries that come with a big law position.
Yep.
Right? And so everything in the law school model is geared toward big law. Here's how to get the salary that will allow you to pay off these god-awful loans that you've taken out to become a credentialed attorney. And part of that is when you look at the way law school is set up, right? Job searching begins after first year with OCI, on-campus interviewing. Who are the firms that participate in on-campus interviewing, right? OCI is filled with, AmLaw 100 firms. And all of the focus in career opportunities in law school is pointed toward big law. Except only 15% of lawyers ever practice in a big law firm. So pretty fundamental, just statistical disconnect between what law school is designed to push you toward and what most of us are going to experience. The other aspect that comes out of this is the law school curricula itself is designed to create docile, rule-following cogs to fit into the big law machine. And the whole thing is designed to make you compliant, which is what big law firms want out of their juniors, right? To show up and do the work 110-hour weeks and think that they're getting close to partnership. And it's all bullshit. I say this as somebody who lived in big law for a little while and got out of it. So I've seen this from both ends of this, right? And so, what don't they teach you in law school? They don't teach you anything about being a lawyer, right? Because being a lawyer is more than writing a brief or a motion for the senior partner at a big law firm. At least that's what it's going to be for 85% of us, right? Over
That's right.
50% of lawyers at some point are a solo, right?
Wow.
Think about that number, right? And so, what don't they teach you in law school? They don't teach you how to make a living. They don't give you any of the tools that prepare you to go out into the wild and hunt for yourself, farm, right? Do any of the things that are required when you build a business, whether you are building with partners or on your own. And so law school does a huge disservice to us by promising us one thing and failing to deliver it entirely. So that's a very large discourse on a pretty straightforward question. I can give you a straightforward answer if you want, but that's where I start.
No, I mean that's an opening vibe, as it were, and I'm using the word vibe, knowing that I am way too uncool to use the word vibe in any context, but feeling it apropos to the moment here. So that vibe right there, I mean, it speaks a lot to at McGrann Law. It's mobilize, or the bite of big law mobilized for what's the tagline there?
Yeah, the bite of big law mobilized for good.
That's right. That's right. So you've taken your experience in law school, in big law, and translated it into something that is perhaps more friendly to the person who is outside of the reach of big law, yet needs services adjacent to what is provided there. Perhaps we'll talk about seed counsel and other spaces. So what inspired you to take these concepts, and you being, you bill yourself as the anti-lawyer lawyer as well, and establish your own business for this particular niche?
Yeah. So, I only got out of big law because I nearly died and had the opportunity to start over again. Right. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me because I got out of big law. I had to take a break as I was getting better, and I was thinking about starting my own firm, right? Because my wife, bless her, she supported us for a year and a half when I wasn't working and I was too ill to do anything. And after I had my transplant, she said, "I think that you're feeling well enough. Could you start making some money again?" Right? So, yeah, that's a fair ask. But the thought of going back to a big firm just was not on the table for me. And so I said, "I think I'm going to start my own firm." And she said, "You don't know what the hell you're doing." I said, "You're right." She said, "You should do it anyway." I said, "All right, perfect."
That's awesome.
And out of a sheer piece of luck, the way that I approached it wasn't in terms of what kind of law do I want to practice. I thought, who were the kind of people that I really loved working with? Right? Who were the people when they showed up on my phone or in my email, I got excited to talk with them, right? As opposed to, and every lawyer, everybody in business knows that sometimes that name pops up on your phone and you're like, shit. Right?
Yeah.
So how do I set up the practice in my life to revolve around the kind of people that are my people that I love working with? And those tended to be people who are a little crazy like you and me, who go and start a business, right? And want to build and create rather than simply maintain something. And I say that it was lucky because if I had tried to do what I was doing previously, no Fortune 50 company is going to hire a random solo in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to do their litigation. That just doesn't happen, right? And I was doing, high stakes corporate litigation, at that level, and it didn't translate to the life that I was trying to build. And as I started working with these startup founders, these early stage businesses or small businesses in general, I realized that there was a pretty sizable chunk of the market that just wasn't served properly by larger firms. The pricing was just too much. The thing that I came to learn is that most, not all, but most attorneys in big law are terrible at business. They have no conception of what it is like to own and run and operate a business.
Right.
And pretty quickly, I realized that one of the differentiating characters of my firm was I run a business too. right?
Hmm.
I can sit down and talk with you as a fellow business owner, as opposed to somebody who shows up and says, no, you can't do that. The law says that's illegal, right?
Right.
That's really not what business owners want or need, right? You sit down and you say, okay, what's the opportunity here?
Hmm.
Right? How are we going to go chase this thing that is a huge potential opening for your business, right? And so having that kind of ability to sit down and talk as a co-equal business person has opened up so many relationships and opportunities for me.
So you mentioned, spending time being very ill.
Mm-hmm.
That helped you make the leap, but that can't have been the only thing in life that would drive you to start a business. I find that for most, there's perhaps some spark or at least some gunpowder that was behind that was then lit. So for you, looking back, what what do you believe informed you becoming a business owner and the person you
Yeah.
are today?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, at heart, I'm a creative, right? Um, that goes to, I played music when I was a kid. I still play music, although not in bands and out. Um, I
Well,
I
and if people listen to your podcast, Sonder Union, it's your music on there.
That's true. That's right. And I still record stuff. I just don't get on stage and play it for people. I write a lot, right? And not just the missives and angry letters that I put up on LinkedIn, but I'm working on a novel, right? And that's something that's
Yes.
been sort of core to my sense of self since I can remember. And it turns out that building a business is a creative act,
Hmm.
right? It's creating something out of nothing, right? It is imagining into reality something that you want to be there. And so there was a lot of my energy that got channeled into this, and it worked because I was used to that creative endeavor. There's also the point where, Charlie, I was a terrible employee. I was a terrible employee because I was not that docile creature that law school tried to mold me into. I was the person who, a senior partner would come to me and say, here's what we're going to do. And I'm going to say, it's not going to work. He said, yeah, but I said, we're going to do that. I said, we are doing our client a disservice here if we go this route. Right. And
Oh.
right. And so, in the last review that I had before I got sick and left, the single line takeaway was, Owen is insubordinate, even if usually correct. And if that is not an encapsulation of what an entrepreneur is, right? Refusing to simply do the thing because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Or because that's the way it's always been done. Let's go figure it out. Let's go run the experiment and see if it works.
And oftentimes it's a lot more lucrative to go run the experiment if we're being honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm interested in that perspective from you because you talk about the creative side. You know that I have my artist background as an actor. You have it through music. And yet I would say both of us are unafraid of capitalism, which, despite the fact that you now come from two areas, art and the law, where capitalism is sometimes there's a friction-based relationship there. You seem comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Are you trying to say that most attorneys feel that they are above business, that they're professionals somehow, and that they don't need to think about marketing and sales and all these dirty words that, are beneath us, right?
Your words, not mine, Owen. Your words alone.
Fair enough. I will take responsibility for those words. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you are providing value to somebody, right, you are opening up an exchange of value, right? So, there is, I know that you're familiar with a lot of Seth Godin's work, right? But one of his points is, if you can help somebody, it's incumbent upon you. You have an ethical obligation to offer to help, right? It is something as a person to person. If you can help somebody, try to do it. And really, that's all sales is, right? Hey, I've got a way for you to get through this, right? The way that I've been thinking about it lately is, what attorneys really offer isn't hours, right? Nobody wants to actually buy my time, right? We're not offering pieces of paper, right? Although we are probably the single largest killer of trees in the world. We What we offer is transformation. Here's where you are. I can help you get over here.
Mm.
And when you think about it that way, we have the capacity and the power to help change people's lives, right? And if you think about it in those terms, that is an amazing offer that we can give to people and to provide to people and to help them on that transformational journey.
Mm.
And I think too many attorneys really misunderstand or discount what it is that we do. And in the process, we commodify ourselves.
Definitely. So how do you uncommodify yourself?
I mean, I think some of it is you recognize that, each of us has a specific way of doing something, right? When I meet with a potential client, I end every consultation by saying, the thing here is there are a lot of really good attorneys, right? I think I'm one of them. But more important than finding a good attorney is finding an attorney that you trust, that you will call and tell things that you wouldn't tell your spouse sometimes. That may be me. It may not be. I'm not going to be hurt if you find somebody else to be that person for you. It's more important for you to find that person than it is for me to get this business. Right? Mm-hmm. And I think that is one of the ways that you can really start decommoditizing yourself, at least to yourself, right? Is I might be a really good fit for somebody and not other people, right? I am not interchangeable. I'm going to be able to step in and help somebody in a way that another extraordinary attorney might not be able to, not because of any fault of his or, strength of mine. We just meet people in different places.
Right. Okay, so meeting people in different places, you have your sense of who you are. So let me ask kind of the big, broad, but I think fun question. Who is Owen McGrann, and who's the type of person that vibes with Owen?
Yeah. I am as Walt Whitman says, I am large, I contain multitudes, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing that I find reflected back to me when I talk with clients, right? And one of the things that I would encourage any business owner, attorney or not, to do is at least once a year. I tend to do it at the end of the year. I will invite clients into a 15-minute meeting and just say, how am I doing? Right? What can I do for you that's better? What has been really impactful for you that we've worked on together this year? Because you will be shocked at what you learn when you just give the opening for that kind of discussion, right? And when clients are comfortable having that kind of discussion with you, you get a lot better. You learn a lot. And I have yet to have it be the case that, and this isn't the intent, but more work comes from it, right?
I'm sure.
And so I veered off your initial question, and I have ADHD, and I completely forgot what it was.
Who cares? Who cares? We're at this point now. That's what matters. And what you've described there is such a vulnerable process. And I completely meal-mouthed the word vulnerable there. Let me just go ahead and highlight that for a moment. I think I added an extra syllable. But that's a very vulnerable process to reach out to clients because you are in the expert seat. And to be asking the client to have an opinion about your expertise is not something people easily come by. I'll admit, not always something that I easily come by. So for the person who hears that and goes, I understand from an intellectual standpoint, that is actually a good idea. And I agree with that. It is a good idea.
Mm.
But from an emotional standpoint, I don't know how ready I am for that. What would you say to that individual?
I mean, I would say you're never ready for it, right? There's not ever going to be a point where you're like, okay, now's the time. You have to, I mean, the whole point of vulnerability is that you might get hurt, right? If there's no chance of getting hurt, you're not being vulnerable, right? And this, I mean, that is almost literally the definition of the word, right? And so at some point you have to decide that what you might achieve from doing this outweighs the protection of yourself, right? I mean, the worst thing that's happened, and I mean, some of the feedback that I get isn't always sunshine and rainbows, right? It's like,
Yeah.
Like sometimes you could answer emails a little bit more quickly. It's like, yep, that checks out. I hate email. Yep. Right? How about instead of sending me an email, you send me a text message on my business number? I'll get back to you more quickly that way. And so you start working around things, but you learn a lot about things that you do that you never see yourself doing. Right? In the same way that, so you're an actor. How much did you learn about the way you act by watching video of you acting?
Oh, God, I hated watching myself on video.
Exactly.
Still in many cases do.
Yeah. But you see, the thing that you thought you were doing might not have been what you were doing. Right. And you can pick up on it and then learn from that. It is a tremendous learning opportunity, even if it is painful. Right.
Yeah.
And it is. I hate listening to my own music. Right. I think that I am a terrible, sloppy guitar player when I hear myself because I know what it should sound like. I can
grab a guitar real quick and I can show you what actual sloppy guitar sounds like. You'll feel much better.
Right. And I mean, I have a podcast. I hate listening to myself on the podcast. Right. It's hard to do. And the thing is, we always think that other people are going to be worse critics of us than we are of ourselves.
Oh, gosh.
It's almost never the case. Right? We're almost always far more hard on ourselves than anybody else will be. And for the people who are thinking about doing this exercise, inviting a client in and being vulnerable with them, they're not going to show up for that meeting unless they're there to help you. Right? Because if they don't have something that's going to help or that they think is going to be useful, they're going to say, no, I can't do that, because they're not going to still be your client if they want to show up and shitmouth you, right? That's just not the way it's going to go, right? I mean, you might hear stuff that you don't particularly want to hear, but it's there because they're on your side. They're there to help you.
That's a massive reframing, a very positive reframing that just feels so Owen-like. But I also know that a lot of people who have learned how to do positive reframes oftentimes had to learn that skill to deal with negativity at times. So I'm curious, what is your background and relationship with cynicism, negativity, etc., and how did you find a new path for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, to go to the root of things here, right? I come from a family that has a history of depressiveness, right? I've suffered several episodes of major depression in my life. It's been a while, and I'm doing great now, and I'm very grateful for what it has taught me, right? But, one of the most important things to do, I have found, I speak only for myself, is with those negative thoughts and emotions, right? As a kid, especially as men and as boys in the United States, right? at least in my experience, we're taught that anger is an acceptable emotion and no other emotion is okay. Right. And so we process everything through the lens of anger. And it decouples ourselves from what we're actually feeling. And one of the most important things to do is to sit down and actually start putting words to the feelings, concepts to what it is that you're going through. It's hard work, but what it does is it gives you a vocabulary to be able to work through the things, right? And, if you're able to name it, you can start saying, okay, but why do I feel that, right? What is driving this kind of thing? And spending the time doing that allows you to work towards a better state, towards some sort of contentedness or happiness. And it's very difficult to do that exclusively on your own, right? There's self-work that you have to do, but you've got to invite other people in, right?
Yes.
And that can take any number of forms. It could be a spouse, it could be a therapist, it could be a friend, but you have to allow it to get out of your own head too.
To help with that, I mean, so you and I, we have mutual friend, past guest of the podcast, Tony Albrecht, created a community, the Unrationed community that you and I have both participated in. From a community side of things, did you know to seek out a community, or did a community come and find you?
Yes. When I was younger, I thought that I was a lone wolf, right? That I was better off on my own and, I'll just figure things out. And I don't want to burden other people with my own shit.
Yep.
The older I get, the more I realize that there is no such thing as a lone wolf. You just have very lonely people. And finding people who are not exactly like you, right? Who have different things going on, from whom you can learn things that you've not gone through and can reflect that back on yourself and figure out a little bit more about yourself and how to be with and for other people. That sense of longing for community has really, over the past 10 years or so, hit me. But you don't always necessarily seek out a specific community, right? Sometimes that community finds you. And the Unrationed group, I started posting on LinkedIn about a little over 2 years ago. And I did it mostly because I was a solo attorney sitting in this office, 10 hours a day, kind of lonely and bored. And, I went to LinkedIn because it was like, okay, I can connect with some people there.
Yeah.
And then those people found me. Right. And so, it's not always an intentional thing, even if it is something that you want.
So in that process of finding community, how did that affect your life? I mean, what were the changes that you've seen since moving away from that lone wolf status?
One of the things that is wonderful about the Unrationed community is most of the men in there, if not all of them, are business owners, right? And the thing that a lot of people who don't own businesses don't recognize is how lonely it can be, right?
Yeah.
Because you can talk to people about your problems, but unless they own a business, they're going to look at you and be like, yeah, cool story, bro. They don't understand the weight of some of it.
Yeah.
Even spouses, they see it, but unless you're in that seat, it can be hard. If you have employees, there are things that you cannot go to them about, right? Because it would breach that kind of trust that you're trying to build within the team, and frankly, they don't care about some of it, right? And so finding a community of people who you can reach out to and say, "Can you believe this?" and have it reflected back. It's like, "Oh yeah, fucking hell, I went through that once. That was insane," right? Or 2 weeks ago, for my estates firm, I finished an automation that went from reception of lead all the way through invoicing. So every step between those two are now in an automated workflow. And, I texted Pat, and I was like, dude, I just did this. And he was effusive. And I told a buddy of mine who doesn't own a business, and he was like, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it supposed to do that? Right. And, most people who don't own a business don't recognize that the real work is that day-to-day little bit where you try it 5 different ways before it works. And then it's just another tiny bit of a process that you don't have to think about it again. But that's how you build a business. It's not the big idea. It's not, the grand pronouncements of what you're going to do. It is sitting down and trying to figure out why the wrong email is being sent out at a trigger of an automation.
So you're in the thick of it right now with your estates firm. And I'm curious, you're working hard on developing all this automation, all of these systems, and this intersects with ADHD, which is another, we could go all the way down that path. Like there's so many, right? The Whitman quote, which, by the way, if people want to know a little bit of who Owen McGrann is, it's that he uses a Whitman quote, but he doesn't use it because he's trying to use it. It's a way of communication. And I think that's an important difference between some people. Some people are doing it to show that they know the Whitman quote. Some people hope to invite you into knowing the Whitman quote. And there's a difference in that individual. But yeah, in aiming for that scale, building systems connected to ADHD, how do those realms intersect for you, both in the positive and negative?
Yeah. So again, to take one step back from that, it is no accident that there is a statistically higher proportion of people with ADHD who are entrepreneurs than there are people in ADHD and Gen Pop, right? Mm-hmm. There is folks with ADHD, we have a different relationship to risk than most people, right? So we have a much higher incidence rate in entrepreneurs and in people in prison, right?
Fascinating.
So that's not an accident, right?
So we're 1 for 2 in your case, and we'll see how the other goes.
I'm batting 500. I'm aiming for 1,000 by the time I die. But part of the drive for an entrepreneur is I'm going to try something and it might not work, right? That is the basic premise of entrepreneurship. I'm going to build something and it might not work. And folks with ADHD find that fun and invigorating. It's a dopamine hit, right? It hits all the right brain chemicals and it makes us happy. And so, I'm sure you're familiar with the Colby test, right? My quick start is a 9.
Same.
My follow through is a 2.
I think I'm a 4.
Yeah. So I'm really good at starting things. I'll get an idea, and rather than spending, a month planning and thinking through something, I just start doing it and start seeing what's going to work. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I have a lot of failed projects, and that's a good thing. Right. Because I try them, I realize it didn't work, and I move on. But the downside of this is I also have a lot of projects, right? I have 2 law firms. I'm writing a novel. I have a podcast. I have a newsletter. I post every day on LinkedIn. At some point you have to step back and say, is all of this good for me? Right? Am I burning myself out doing things that I really love doing? Right? Because just because you love doing it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that is good for you to do. Right? All of our cocaine loving friends will attest to this.
We're getting closer and closer to the prison side of things.
There we go. And so, part of what I'm really good at in business is just putting to the test ideas, right? And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I'm perfectly okay with failure, even if I don't like it a whole lot, right? but the ADHD sort of powers that sort of iterative process of pushing a business forward.
One of the reasons I was hoping we might arrive at this particular intersection of systems and ADHD is because a lot of entrepreneurs, law firm owners that I talk with have a conflicted relationship with systems, and a lot of them believe that they are not necessarily capable of building them because they are so distracted, they're bad at systems. I think a lot of people would look at someone with ADHD and say, oh, there's no way that person can probably execute some really good work, maybe a curious individual, but building systems, that's too long and complicated of a process to focus on. So I don't know whether you're going to completely dispel that or lean into it, but that perception, what's the reality?
So for far more so than for most neurotypical people, having systems and habits is the only way that you can get by when you have ADHD. Now, building habits is much more difficult for people with ADHD. But, I have my weeks set up that there are certain days that I work on specific things at the same time every week. And I don't have to look at my calendar because I just know, okay, now it's time to sit down and do this. Mm-hmm. It's a way to get yourself into the habit and to the process of doing things. And systems are a larger version of habit, right? I'm really good at conceiving of systems, seeing how they should work, putting together the diagram of the system. What I am not good at is the nitty-gritty building the system itself. But that's why I have somebody who's in ops, right? I sit down with Gabby every morning, right? And we talk about what we're building, what I need to do. She's basically my babysitter. Every morning I'm like, here's what I think I need to do. And she's like, nope. And I'm set straight and we go forward, right? But building the system, is so critical, especially if you start bringing on people other than yourself, right? If you want to stay solo forever, you might not need a system, right?
Yep.
Your system is you. If you want to scale at all, it is absolutely critical to start having standard operating procedures. And here's how we answer this particular email. You might want to rip the guy's head off, but that's not going to be a good outcome, right? And so building these ways of doing things, there are a ton of ways that you can do that, without having to necessarily put every nail in the ship to build a ship, right?
However, let me just say, if you're from the company Boeing and you're listening to this, please put every bolt in the plane.
Everyone. Double check them. God. So that's what happens when you put the accountants in charge of a engineering firm. Right?
Right? Hey, can we use dish soap as lubricant for rubber gaskets? Is that okay?
It's cheaper.
It is. Technically, it works until it doesn't.
Until it doesn't. Yes. The stress testing of things may have taken a cut.
Yeah.
But I mean, that also goes to, like, you see all the time in businesses, and it happens in law firms too, right? The firms that grow, there's a good attorney there, but there's a visionary, there's an artist in charge of things, right? And a lot of the people you've had on this podcast might not call themselves artists, but they are. That's what they're doing. They're creating stuff. And what happens eventually is a firm will grow, and there's a next generation of leadership, and they put competent people in instead of artists.
Yeah. And
you see this in business after business where the life of the thing goes out of it. It can still continue doing something, but the sort of verve that it has just dissipates.
Yeah. There's a book by Bob Lutz, Car Guys versus Idiots, that's Icons versus Idiots. Car Guys versus Bean Counters.
Yes.
And it's about when the accountants take over and suddenly he's talking about, you start seeing the gaps get wider and wider between the doors, and everything's just a little compromised because it shaves half a cent here, half a cent there,
Okay.
and that all adds to the margin.
So I'm going to flip the script. I'm going to ask you a question now.
Oh no.
So how do we square this with the almost inevitable influx of PE into law firms? Because I know that this is something that you've been thinking about, and you have a bunch of really, really interesting and incisive episodes about this. Because this is one of the things that I've been thinking about when I'm building, especially the estates firm. Right, it's a firm that I'm building so that I don't have to be in it at all, and it runs right and investable in that sense. But at the same time, when PE shows up, it's not always the best thing, right?
Mm-hmm. It's everything has its pluses and minuses. It's I don't know that this is going to be the perfect metaphor for it, but it's taking a solo artist and putting them in a band, where if the solo artist doesn't know how to play with a band and they're really playing in competition with the band, everything's going to crater. But if they understand, how to let the percussionist do his or her job, why it's important to have the bassist there, and maybe you're going to have to give up the lead singer role because that's not actually what you are as gifted at. Instead, you're really great at construction of melody. You're better on lead guitar. Okay, if you're willing to do that, you can invite, and that being very intentional, you can invite in other artists who are extremely good at their part of the process. It's more difficult if we were to go into, say, the painting metaphor, for example. Many great painters learned how to create their own canvases because they wanted to work on canvases that were greater than what you're going to pick up at an art shop. As a matter of fact, that's a skill that you learn in college, is how to stretch a canvas, get it all properly set up, prime it, etc. And I think a lot more people are going to have to think about, what does it look like if you're working in a multimedia team of artists where you're going from painting to printmaking or large scale fabrication, where you have multiple welders working on a job who have opinions on how things can be connected and what the final operational principles are of this and what the impact of the art is going to be. So learning how to be a collaborative artist and combining, or maybe focusing on, here's the big vision that I have, but I'm not as obsessive about how I get there.
Yeah, and to go to your initial metaphor here about a band, right? The only critical step for a really good musician in a band is to learn when not to do things. Right? Not how to play well, it's when to just shut up. Right? Let somebody else fill it, or allow there to be an emptiness, right? And if you're just a dude with an acoustic guitar at a coffee shop, you have to make all of the noises, right? Yes. Knowing when to allow, the snare hit to be the center of attention, as opposed to jamming down on that, E minor or something, can be such a critical aspect of just realizing it's no longer something that you have to fill all of the spaces.
Boy, oh boy, we could easily go off on a tangent about how that is one of the issues oftentimes with every new phase of music that we encounter. And that's actually how a lot of people are being brought up in general, which is everything has to be filled. You must fill it maximally all the time,
right?
Instead of letting smaller individual components shine. That's almost a global lesson in and of itself.
Yes.
But maybe we'll get into that on the next episode together, Owen. So if people are interested in connecting with you and learning more about the work that you do, etc., what's the best way for them to do that?
It's probably LinkedIn. I am annoying as hell there most days of the week. Today I'm getting angry direct messages from people in Big Law because I again went after the billable hour. Yeah. It's always fun. It's like clockwork. If I say anything about it, the angry DMs come in, but they'll never actually post on the comment on the post. So LinkedIn is the best way to find me.
Excellent. All right, Owen. So the last three-parter for you.
Yeah.
What are you reading, watching, and listening to these days?
Yeah. So right now I am working my way through a book called Anniversaries by U.A. Johnson. It's a really fascinating book. It was published, I think, in the late 70s. But the premise of the book is there's a chapter from every single day of the year 1964. From a family that moved in from Germany, living in New York. And the conceit is like there's a piece of the New York Times in each of the chapters, and it goes through like this journey of a single mother and her daughter integrating into New York and trying to build a life here. It's 1,700 pages. So it's taken me, basically what I'm doing is I'm reading one chapter per day to sort of just do the full year read of it. So that's the pleasure reading that I'm doing right now. But, I also have, a bunch of business books going, usually. Those aren't particularly interesting though. As far as listening, I'm listening to a lot of 40s bebop jazz. The novel that I'm
Speaking
writing,
of the notes you shouldn't play.
Exactly, right? The novel that I'm writing takes place in 1941 and 1946 in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh was one of the main jazz areas of the country at that point. And right in 1946 is the sort of epicenter of the move from swing jazz to bebop after the war. And so bebop is going to be, Dizzy Gillespie and early Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, stuff like that, where it goes from the big band stuff to, quartets and quintets of people playing really technical, beautiful stuff. So I've been sort of jamming on that. I don't watch a whole lot of stuff. My wife and I have been very, very slowly working our way through Three Body Problem.
I'm reading the book right now.
Yeah, we read the book together a couple years ago. And nice. So that's what we're doing.
That's phenomenal. Well, Owen, always a treat to talk with you.
Likewise, Charlie.
I have the privilege to have conversations with you outside of the podcast scope as well, and I treasure those. I've treasured your friendship over this last. It's hard to believe it's only been like 8-9 months.
I know,
right?
I know. Well, you're easy to get to know.
Ground out in Colorado at 9,000 feet will really bond a couple of people.
It will do that. It will do that.
Oh, and thank you for everything you've had to share, your insights, your wisdom, your experiences. I hope we were able to shed just a little bit of light for some folks on ADHD, you asked a question about private equity, about how you can combine your past experiences to build a new, more optimistic you. There's a lot of goodness covered here. So I appreciate you, Owen.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a ton of fun.
Good. And we will see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.